Hey guys, in an effort to make sure video games don't ruin me, I have decided to get back into reading, something I haven't done since high school and college. This is nostalgic. I haven't done this in years, so hopefully the activity is just as fun as it was in high school.
One reading session later.
Reading is fine, but something about it just isn't clicking with me.
This right here is a book. What do you do with it?
I'm doing everything I can here!
Schools taught us that reading is good for the brain, and I am inclined to agree. Reading does wonders into immersing us into the fantastical fictional world or filling our minds with boundless knowledge. It's an important life skill. Almost every activity ever pretty much requires it. Being illiterate makes it a struggle to even live, let alone play video games. The back of most Switch games has a little blurb that basically says, if you're illiterate, you're f***ed. However, there is just one obstacle standing in the way for a smooth reading experience. You have to hold something physical and have to move your hands. Books may be TV for the brain, but you know me, I'm too lazy to move my body more than is required. Turning a page is an exercise itself, and when you turn a page, you run the risk of one of the most dreaded things that could ever happen to you. The paper cuts.
Just like video games, there are books for all ages, so the older you get, the more challenge you want. Reading children's books outside of spending time with kids or nostalgia is just so immature. Most novels don't have pictures, and when they do, the amount is sparse compared to children's picture books. I did say earlier that reading is like brain television, but not everyone has the mental visualization skills needed for that feeling. You could describe to me the most beautiful princess in the world, and my mind could be thinking,
that is one epic toilet!
The imagery can be vivid, but it's heavily open to interpretation that differs from person to person. That princess could have beautiful long hair, but without extra context, she could be blonde or brunette for all we know. Artists who make the front covers to novels, I salute you.
And if all else fails, just hire a really good looking model to take a picture for your cover. The less clothes, the better.
If you still want pictures, you aren't limited to children's picture books. Graphic novels, comic books, and mangas have images, meaning that you have more context to the story, but now we're back to the same problem of having to hold something physical. Manga has it the worst because you must read it right to left and not the other way around like we're used to reading everything ever. And as technology marches on and we've grown more conscious about recycling, books have started to take on digital form to cut down the paper needed to produce them, and the print format makes preservation child's play, but you still might need to visualize what the text gives you. And even if one is willing to put up with those problems, there's the fact that to most kids, reading is kind of boring. You sit down and turn pages while your eyes stare at paper with words for minutes on end. Sure, we read text on a screen nowadays, but we have content within that text, a luxury novels just don't have. Unless it has pictures, a young child will surely be disengaged after a while. At least that's what I thought until 6th grade. And on a case-by-case basis, school assignments that involve reading a book probably turn people off of reading books forever due to the academic pressure.
I need a way to recapture that love of reading that I had in high school, but if I'm going to hold something physical, I need to give my fingers more things to do.
The visual novel, a subgenre of the adventure game. These type of games are text heavy. They can get gamers into reading and will eradicate the ever so dreaded paper cut at the expense of the bandage industry. Visual novels are like your typical books, except you're using buttons to advance, and the characters and setting are drawn out. These type of games are story-based. The story takes precedence over everything else about the game, but just because a game is heavily focused on the story doesn't mean they automatically fall under the visual novel category. Life is Strange, for example, is a game that's heavily story-based, but it's pretty much disqualified as a visual novel because of the way the set pieces are used. They may be interactive fiction, but Life is Strange and games like it are more of an interactive movie than an interactive novel. So you might be thinking, oh, then a game has to be heavy on text and static images to be a visual novel, right? Well, some games like RPGs tend to use elements of them, but whether or not they actually fall under the genre is anybody's guess. We'll get into that later, but first, a brief history lesson on where it all began. The history of visual novels can get pretty lengthy, but we can go all the way back to 1983. This was the year the first game that could be called a visual novel has been released, a PC game known as Portopia Renzoku Satsujin Jiken, or translated to the Portopia serial murder case. The object of the game is to solve a murder mystery, which involves traveling to different areas like an open world and talking to people and making choices. Depending on how you interact with the game, you might get more story than one would just going through the beaten path. What does this remind you of? Well, there are these wonderful books known as Choose Your Own Adventure books. These type of books are where the destinies of the characters are in your hands, again like a video game. Basically, after a certain point in the book, you are prompted with a question and you turn to the designated page based on your choice. These things have multiple endings, making each reading experience more varied than the last, an experience you can also get with visual novels. One thing I learned in my high school reading is that linearity can be a bitch. Traditional and visual novels typically are both linear in story structure, but the big difference is that the traditional novel is almost completely linear. Sure, you can read the best story of a book over and over and over again, but the magic of seeing the important plot points of a story kinda diminishes in subsequent readings. No matter how you read it, the conclusion will always be the same, and all the little stuff will be the same as well. Sure, with good writing, you can avoid this rut, and you can enjoy the story more with new information gained, but that magic eventually fades after at least the third time. Though that's not to say that visual novels aren't linear, because they totally are. So what makes solving a mystery or finding love in a visual novel more fun than in a book? Just like the choose your own adventure books, choices are the main mechanic of the visual novel. These can be a game of its own. Unlike choose your own adventure books, however, visual novels are not constrained to physical limitations, making telling long and complex stories easier. Because of these choices, the amount of text in these things rival that of traditional novels. Yeah, f*** off Great Gatsby, I'm doing an essay on Winds of Change. The beauty of these choices is that they provide additional information about the story, so much so that sometimes it could take multiple playthroughs to get the full picture. Traditional novels, the information you read for the first time will be all you get for all subsequent readings. But with visual novels, different choices could get even the smallest bit of information you might not have gained otherwise. When making the choice, you may get additional context to the lore, characterization, bits of humor, or even the deciding factor to decide the course of the entire story. Of course, there are times that your choices in these things might be meaningless. No matter what choice you make, the result will be the same. If that girl is doomed to shit her pants later, choosing to insult or compliment her before then is not going to change anything. Other times, some choices might seem meaningless at first, but become particularly important later, which adds to the shock value of the twist. How else was I supposed to know that drinking that cup of water would come back to bite me in the ass? So what does the typical visual novel experience entails? Well, it's right there in the name. Lots and lots of reading, and with the amount of reading, you can find a club to share the story with. Expect to find lots and lots of text boxes, sprites representing a speaker, and a first-person point of view, both from their view and the text. So basically, almost every novel with a first-person perspective, but with pretty pictures and animation, which can be enough of a game for some people. Being at least some kind of literate is pretty much required to be able to have the right to play these. If you don't know how to read a certain word, then congratulations, you have unlocked hard mode.
If I didn't know how to read the word the, I might as well stop playing video games.
Sometimes you get so caught up with the setting, the art, or the possible love of your life that you forget to actually read and miss some parts of the story. Don't worry, the designers thought of that. Some visual novels have a text log that pretty much records all the text that you have read up to this point. So if you were reading too fast and realized the character probably said f***, better open up that text log and dig through it to confirm that they didn't say f*** and react accordingly. The end goal of a visual novel is to tell a story to a reader. Luckily, there are different types of stories, so there's something out there for everyone in the visual novel field, and I'm going to give an example of two of them. These genres, I feel, are the most common ones you'll find a visual novel for. The first visual novel ever was a mystery story, so it's no surprise you will find plenty of visual novels of that story genre. Mystery stories are great. They get your brain thinking on what's going on so that you're just as stumped as the characters. Mystery stories thrive on visual novels because they tend to have bits of dialogue that adds to the story or characters based on the choices you make. But just because the mystery genre is the first visual novel ever doesn't mean it's the most popular, especially considering where virginity is involved. Dating sims are considered visual novels most of the time, but there are so much about them that they could be its own genre, but that's for another day. Dating sim stories come in all shapes and sizes. It doesn't matter if your objective is to save the kingdom, escape from being trapped with strangers, or become president of the United States. Your task in these games, whether it's primary or not, is to be one step closer to getting laid, but it's the character that's getting laid, so you can experience it while not getting laid in real life. Of course, being a dating game, you gotta have characters that you declare to be your future husband or wife, so bring on the sex appeal. Of course, this is a dating simulator, so you may stumble upon things your mom wouldn't be too proud of. But the flow of dating sim visual novels is that you go through the main story, and on the way you bond with a character and learn about them, and then you try to score. I swear, I think I've stumbled upon this cat on Tinder at one point. As stated earlier, visual novels are very light in the gameplay. There is a reason you will rarely find these games outside of PC or portable systems like the Switch. The most gameplay you can get out of a visual novel is the point and click and making choices that will change how parts of the story goes. It's pretty minimal and you're not very involved with the game aside from navigating menus and reading. But if you just want a relaxing reading experience but with added pictures and many choices but without the tedium of turning pages, visual novels are for you.
That's all well and good, but I want to read and prove my worth in something. That's where Phoenix Wright got us.
This is what happens when you try to read and play games at the same time. These games tend to blur that line between a reading experience and an actual game. But even with more gameplay elements, there's still a visual novel at heart. However, the more gameplay elements you put into a visual novel, the more I start to wonder if they could even be called novels at all. Reading is still involved since there's still a lot of text, but now you have a game to play, which kind of defeats the purpose of a relaxing reading experience. It's an engaging gameplay experience, but are you really looking for that if you just care about the story and nothing else? It's like saying, I hate the story of Night in the Woods, but god I love the gameplay. Japan does distinguish these games like two separate types of genres. If a game has reading and very little other types of interaction, it is defined as a visual novel, or NVL. However, a game that has problem solving and gameplay is considered an adventure game, or AVG or ADV. But it seems as if Japan is better than everyone when it comes to categorization, because this distinction is only in Japan. Those in the West tend to lump both types of games under the all-encompassing visual novel genre, even though it has enough gameplay to be an adventure game. The Ace Attorney games are the closest you could get to a traditional visual novel. However, it does enough for it to be considered an actual game. See, most traditional novels don't exactly have what I consider a lose condition. You make a wrong choice in a traditional visual novel, the game continues down a different path to a new ending. In the worst case scenario, the protagonist dies or ends up forever single. It technically means you lost since you failed to achieve the end goal, but for all intents and purposes, it's basically a new ending to the list of possible endings listed as the worst ending. Here, the choices you make are the key to victory. You are given a problem, and the game tasks you to find a solution to said problem. In this case, finding contradictions using the evidence you have and gathering information to find the truth of the case. You make one wrong choice in Phoenix Wright, you're one step closer to a loss. Pointing out the wrong facts too many times, then the client you're defending is found guilty, and it's game over.
See, I'm not some sort of coward. I read to win. That way I can prove I am good at something.
You have your Ace Attorneys where you play just like a normal visual novel, but you actually can lose. However, the spirit of the traditional novel is still there. Sure, you would have to have some problem-solving skills, but it's still menu navigation at the end of the day, so it's close to the regular type. But then you start including other game genres and requiring skills to get through, and that's when it starts to get tricky. Though it's still a visual novel at heart, it starts creating fusions God never intended to happen. The Zero Escape series is where you're trapped with a group of people with different personalities. You do get your fair dose of reading where you get to talk to the characters and learn about them, as well as learn about the story as well. Not only that, the Zero Escape series have multiple endings. You do need to play through the game multiple times to get the complete story. So there goes the reading, so let's continue. I don't think what I wrote on my hands is enough. This is what Zero Escape is all about. You are thrust into an escape room where you have to interact with objects and solve puzzles in order to, well, escape the room. This is where the visual novel line gets murkier because you're not just navigating menus and pointing and clicking, you're solving actual puzzles. It's time to put your brains to work because you're gonna need it to escape the room. It even has an in-game calculator, so better brush up on your math. The Professor Layton series, a point-and-click visual novel where you sometimes solve puzzles, just like Zero Escape, but unlike Zero Escape, this one has less death. And also, unlike Zero Escape, where you have to explore the rooms to find clues to solve the puzzles, you have to solve the puzzle based on what's provided to you in the context of the puzzle. Ghost Trick Phantom Detective for the Nintendo DS and later for mobile devices. It's a puzzle game where you take control of the ghost of a guy who recently died. There goes that death again. You have to manipulate objects around you to increase the movement range of your ghost and to prevent a tragedy from happening. You're seeing a bit of a pattern here. If a visual novel must test your skills, it's usually in the form of a puzzle. Your brain is already being stimulated by reading. Not a lot, but any amount of stimulation is stimulation, so why not stimulate it some more by giving you a puzzle?
Puzzles in a visual novel do stimulate the brain because they give you some challenge. However, what if you want to do all that while under pressure?
Puzzles are usually slower paced. You might have to think quickly in some instances, but oftentimes you have all the time in the world to think. However, some games under this genre can put the pressure on you, and Trauma Center is the epitome of pressure. Oh, you want to read a story about a doctor going up in the medical world while taking on a man-made disease? Well, you better remember to save that patient. The pressure is on! Better work faster, you got a death on your hands! Except if you're playing Trauma Team, in which case you have all the time in the world to think logically while you figure out what's wrong with this person.
Trauma Center simulation aspects is just one genre of gameplay. Even though you are more involved in the game than all the other visual novels we discussed so far, Trauma Center at least knows what to throw at you. But there is a visual novel series that is a product of throwing as many game genres as possible into a single package.
Danganronpa, a series about a cute monochromatic bear and a bunch of students being forced to get all murdery towards each other and then solve said murder in a trial. It's pretty much if Zero Escape and Phoenix Wright got together and produced this. Now, of course, the main gameplay of a visual novel is still intact. You read words and point and click to interact with the environment. You are able to explore the school, and during your investigations, you get to gather as much information as possible. But then we get to the trials, and this is where the real fun begins. Here's a bit of a fun fact. The title Danganronpa comes from a compound of the Japanese words for bullet and refutation. As such, you can expect the shooting genre to be a recurring element of the series. Even your evidence takes the shape of bullets. Now, the series might have the word that relates to shooting games, and some of the minigames perfectly reflect that, but then it seems like the series is just throwing as many types of gameplay possible to really test your gaming skills while at the same time trying to enjoy the story. Logic puzzles, word games, rhythm games, skateboarding, 2D platformers, what will they throw in next? Despite the clusterfuck of different gameplay genres in the series, at the end of the day, Danganronpa is still somehow classified as a visual novel due to how much text there is in the games. The same holds true for Trauma Centers, where there is loads of text to read outside of the operations. Which makes games like RPGs even more baffling if they should be called the visual novels, since they're very heavy on the text, especially if some segments behave as such. I can't tell you how many times I booted up a Tales game waiting for a relaxing reading experience, only to realize a few minutes later that I'm an idiot. Most RPGs have a lot of text to read, so are they visual novels too? By the logic of having that much text, it should be a visual novel, but the amount of battles make RPGs lean towards not being as such. In a weird way, it makes some sort of sense, since the amount of battling in one complete playthrough of an RPG is more gameplay than the time spent playing the class trial minigames in Danganronpa.
Visual novels are a weird beast when it comes to storytelling games. In a world where you have more interactive means of telling a story, visual novels are basically the closest thing to reading an actual book. However, there are things about this genre that make me ask, what the f is this genre?
When it comes to storytelling games, the heavy amount of text with limited amount of gameplay is what separates the Danganronpas from the Shenmues. Text can be a lot to keep up with, especially with the visual novels that have little actual gameplay. Reading tends to be boring to some people, I understand that. Some people can better digest the story if voice acting is involved, the game story played out like a movie, or if the gameplay complements the game story very well. Some people prefer just reading loads of text to engage in the story, and others like to do that, plus play a game. But what if you are too engrossed in the story, but the game is too hard for you, making it difficult to enjoy the story because the game is preventing you from advancing? If this is you, difficulty settings are your best friend. However, if one makes the gameplay easy to the point where they don't have to do much to enjoy the story, is it really playing a game at all? To that I say no, and surprisingly yes. Because advancing the story is its own kind of reward since you put in some sort of commitment to see it through. So if you're really interested in the story, feel free to set it on easy so you can enjoy it, and if the game is fun, you are free to play it again in higher difficulties because you already digested the story. So playing on easy difficulty in a visual novel is valid for the genre. Though you still gotta be on your toes if you're playing Trauma Center. Visual novels have done things I've never thought possible, turning reading into a game that people can enjoy. Sure, there are better ways a game can tell a story, but there's something about visual novels that make the experience somewhat unique. Printed books are already an art form, but visual novels take that and amplify it in ways I can't even describe, making them even more artistic than print. Visual novels might feel less of a game than all the others, but what makes them the game is present if you dig deep enough. And damn it, do it for your favorite character, they're worth it.
I gotta say, thanks to visual novels, I didn't think I'd find a new love for reading that I had since high school. To celebrate that rekindled love, I decided to form a club for books and visual novels. It's all reading from here. So, our first thing that we'll discuss, Winds of Change of Nintendo Switch. Now, because it is visual novels, I decided to give a free gift for new members. So, our free gift will be a box of tissues.